the night the sirens failed, everyone on Rikers learned how thin the line between control and collapse really was. It started during a humid August evening, the kind where the air inside the block sits heavy enough to choke on. Officers were short-staffed again, running a skeleton crew across 3 housing units that should have had twice the manpower. And somewhere between the broken cameras, the blind stairwells, and the busted perimeter lights, one detainee realized the jail was more vulnerable than anyone wanted to admit. If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. The man at the center of it all was Darren Knox, 27 years old, charged but not yet convicted, smart enough to survive but desperate enough to gamble everything. Darren wasn't a gang leader. He wasn't a loud troublemaker. He was the type who watched quietly, memorizing guard movements, counting the seconds between nightly rounds, noticing which officers leaned too hard on routine and which ones were already burned out. His moment came when a unit disturbance pulled officers toward the other end of the corridor. At the same time, a storm knocked out a section of external lighting near the industrial laundry area. Darren slipped into the shadows, moving fast, guided by the plan he'd built over weeks, a damaged fence panel behind the dumpsters, soft enough that even a small pry bar could bend it open. What he didn't know, what no inmate could have known, was that someone else had been watching him. A trustee assigned to the laundry detail. A man who had his own agenda and his own connections to the underground trade that controlled the flow of contraband in and out of Rikers. Darren's escape was never truly secret. It had been sold, traded to people who didn't want him to make it out alive. By the time Darren reached the outer yard, adrenaline pounding like a second heartbeat, he realized something was off. The panel he planned to slip through had been reinforced earlier that day. No notice. No officer briefing. No work order posted. It shouldn't have been done. Not that fast. Not that quietly. Someone had tipped them off. Inside the blocks, inmates pressed their faces against the narrow windows, watching officers sprint across the yard. Radios cracked. Boots thundered. A helicopter spotlight cut across the water, bathing the island in a cold white glare. Darren froze. And in that moment, he understood exactly where the threat had come from, not the guards, not the cameras, but someone inside the population who had traded his freedom for protection, leverage, or power. As officers closed in, one detail burned through Darren's mind, sharper than the sirens suddenly roaring back to life. If someone inside could sabotage his escape this easily, what else were they controlling? Darren didn't sleep for 2 nights after the failed escape. Every time he shut his eyes, he saw that reinforced panel, the one that shouldn't have existed, and the silent knowledge that someone inside Rikers had handed him over. The officers barely questioned him. They were too overwhelmed, too understaffed, too used to chaos. But the inmates? They watched every move he made. Every face he passed looked like it knew something he didn't. Word travels fast on the island, even faster when contraband phones are buzzing in cells that aren't supposed to have electrical outlets. By the next morning, 3 different factions had already rewritten Darren's story for their own benefit. One group said he snitched. Another claimed he was working with guards. A third insisted he had help from a rival crew that wanted him out of the way. In Rikers, rumors weren't entertainment, they were weapons. What Darren didn't realize was that his escape attempt had crossed paths with something larger, a pipeline of contraband moving through the laundry detail. While officers believed the laundry crew was one of the safest work assignments in the jail, gangs had turned it into a distribution center. They'd hide cell phones in folded sheets, slip razor pieces into pockets, tuck pills inside glove boxes. A corrupt officer only had to look the other way once for an entire week's supply to flow inside. The trustee who watched Darren that night, the same one who tipped off the reinforcement, had been running part of that operation. Darren's escape threatened to expose a blind corner in the yard where drops were made, where staff didn't patrol, where cameras froze every few minutes. If Darren had gone through that fence, the administration would have inspected the area. Inspections meant discovery. Discovery meant shutdown. Shutdown meant someone's profits would evaporate. Darren wasn't sabotaged out of malice. he was sabotaged because someone had something to lose. As the days passed, pressure built. Darren's cell was searched 6 times in 1 week. Officers claimed it was routine, but routine didn't involve dumping his mattress in the hallway and tearing apart his legal papers. Meanwhile, inmates he barely knew began whispering at night, offering deals, warnings, and threats disguised as advice. "People think you saw something. Better keep your head down." Laundry crew doesn't like surprises. The psychological squeeze came slowly but relentlessly. Darren felt the walls closing in, not physically, but socially, strategically, like someone had rewritten the rules without telling him. He tried to stay silent, stay invisible, but invisibility was impossible when the underground economy was shifting around him. Then came the moment that cracked everything open. During evening chow, a folded note slid onto Darren's tray. No name. No signature. Just 6 words, written in blunt pencil. "You weren't supposed to live, Knox." The realization hit him harder than any lockdown. The reinforcement wasn't meant to stop him. It was meant to trap him. And whoever wrote that note wasn't finished. Darren carried that note in his sock for 3 days, rereading the words until they carved grooves in his thoughts. He stopped trusting anyone, officers, inmates, even the sound of his own breathing. Rikers had always been unpredictable, but now the unpredictability felt personal, engineered, deliberate. Someone had marked him, and the question was no longer why he'd been targeted, but when they'd make the next move. The answer came during a late-night count. A fight in another unit pulled officers away from the corridor. The lights flickered, a common glitch, but tonight it felt like a warning. Darren sensed movement before he heard it, footsteps too soft to be officers, too purposeful to be random. 3 silhouettes gathered near the tier door, their voices low, steady, carrying the calm confidence of men who believed nothing would stop them. The laundry trustee stepped forward. He didn't bother with threats. He didn't need to. His message was simple: Darren had wandered into a business that wasn't his. And when a system this corrupted worked smoothly, even one accidental witness could unravel it. The escape attempt hadn't been the issue. Him noticing the blind corner, the fence, the patterns in staff behavior, that was the real danger. But before the trustee could finish, the corridor erupted with noise. Boots pounding. Keys jangling. A supervisor barking orders. The unit went into immediate lockdown. Officers swept through, pulling inmates out for contraband searches. For once, the chaos worked in Darren's favor. It pushed the trustee back and scattered his crew before they could make their move. The sweep wasn't random. Contraband phones had been traced to the laundry detail. An internal affairs probe had quietly begun. And someone, whether an inmate with second thoughts or an officer tired of being used, had reported suspicious activity near the blind corner Darren had nearly slipped through. For the first time in weeks, control shifted. Over the next 48 hours, the entire laundry operation was dismantled. The trustee disappeared into protective custody. Several officers were reassigned pending investigation. New security checks rolled out across the island, exposing how deep the contraband pipeline had run. Darren wasn't named in any reports, but the message rippled through the blocks anyway: he survived something he was never supposed to understand. The aftermath didn't bring relief. It brought clarity. Rikers Island wasn't collapsing because of one escape attempt or one contraband ring. It was collapsing because its structure depended on routine, and routine had become the very thing people exploited. Inmates learned the weaknesses. Staff learned the shortcuts. Corruption filled the gaps. And somewhere between those cracks, control slipped like water through open fingers. Darren didn't leave Rikers with triumph. He left with the kind of silence that stays with a person long after the gates close behind them. A silence built from knowing that on Rikers, survival wasn't about strength, it was about seeing the truth before it swallowed you. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.